10 crazy fan theories about the Lord of the Rings. Allegory for World War II. It's a well-known fact that J.R.R. Tolkien was adamant that his work was not anything besides an open-ended allegory, but even with the word of the author himself, theorists still speculate about what his works actually meant and what could have inspired this epic saga. Some people believe that since he fought in World War I, the series was based around the war, but this of course was denied by Tolkien himself. Others believe, even though he was no longer serving in the military and the stories were written much before World War II, that he was writing directly about that war. Theorists have even gone as far as making the connections between characters. The obvious relation is that Sauron is Hitler and the orcs are Nazis, along with Saruman, who would be the Joseph Stalin type, an ally whom the Allies should not have trusted. However, Tolkien claims that he never wrote a direct allegory for anything, but states that everything a writer imagines is loosely based on their own experiences, and understood that people may view it as an allegory, in which he had no problem, but he just really didn't like it when people claimed he did it on purpose. The eagles, the flying kind, not the singing kind. This is without a doubt one of the more common complaints and theories about the Lord of the Rings movies, which is, why didn't they just ride the eagles all the way to Mordor, dispose of the ring, and enjoy life without everything in between? This can be explained though. For one, it would make for a pretty uninteresting story, therefore we'd basically have no novels or movies about it. But more importantly, just simply riding the eagles there wouldn't be such a foolproof plan. For starters, the eagles are described, as per the novel, as independent creatures who choose when to get involved, if at all. So who's to say they would have even been willing to help? On top of that, you have the Eye of Sauron, who is surely watching the skies, along with the Nazgul, who we see flying winged creatures on occasion. Although one user took a different approach, and without considering that Sauron and Saruman would have been watching nearly everything, came up with the theory that Gandalf planned on using the eagles the whole time and taking the safest, least watched route. It's a good theory, but makes little sense, since if the eagles were really going to help, they'd have just flown straight to the Fellowship. The user even added in the line, "Fly, you fools," suggesting that this was Gandalf hinting at using the eagles. But this is a pretty common expression, and even if true, no one else had a way to communicate with the eagles anyway. The original sin. It may not be known by some, but Tolkien was an extremely Catholic man, but surprisingly, some Catholics have decided to appropriate his work for their own benefit. Even though the man himself stated countless times, and as previously mentioned, that his work was never intended as an allegory for anything, some Catholics assume that his religion influenced him anyway. Some have even claimed that Tolkien even admitted to creating his work as a Catholic allegory, but there's no truth in that. Arguments regarding this theory have included the idea that the ring represents original sin, and that Frodo is somewhat of a Christ figure in the story, as well as claiming that the special lembas bread created by the elves was chosen to symbolize the Holy Eucharist. Again, characters are brought into play, much like the war theory. This time, Sauron is essentially the Satan figure, and Iluvatar is God. You would think Morgoth, to whom Sauron is only a minion, would be a stronger candidate for the role of Satan in the Tolkien universe, assuming such parallel even existed. So while Tolkien was a devoted Catholic, he made no efforts to make any of his mythology match with any religious events or places. The Illuminati. As previously mentioned, J.R.R. Tolkien was a very Catholic man, and despite his detestation of allegory, it's fairly clear to see the influence of his beliefs. But of course, this hasn't stopped theorists from suggesting that Tolkien was working for the Illuminati, because who isn't these days, right? The theorist says he isn't sure if Tolkien was working for them fully or simply just a pawn, but lists his evidence all the same. The theorist goes on to explain that part of the Illuminati's method is to program people to use as slaves, and says that rings are regularly used as part of this so-called control program. Therefore, the ring in Tolkien's novel is clearly a form of programming that has been put in place by the Dark Overlords. Other areas of evidence include the fact that Tolkien uses bloodlines in his novel, which apparently is also meant to be an important part of the Illuminati. A pretty typical theory for the Illuminati, and one which we can't believe the final part of, since bloodlines are pretty much featured in all stories involving royalty. The secret identity of Tom Bombadil. The name Tom Bombadil may not ring any bells to fans of the movies, but if you've read the books, then you already know Tom Bombadil is a strange but merry, impish fellow, who the Fellowship meets up with early on in their adventure. Many find the inclusion of Bombadil in the books perplexing, while others find his exclusion from the movies shocking. He's a very amoral man and doesn't seem evil, since he saves the hobbits from the Old Man Willow, then puts them up in his home, and later saves them again, but this time from the Barrow-wights. Throughout these experiences, Tom sings whimsical ditties and runs around in a bright blue jacket and yellow boots, so to imagine this figure as anything more seems a little tricky. Though one theory states that Tom Bombadil is none other than the Witch King of Angmar. The theory stated as a weak link, stating that the two characters are never seen together and that due to the timeline it could easily work, but quickly became more interesting. In the novels, Bombadil himself wears the ring, which seems to have no effect on him at all, and even when Frodo slips on the ring, Bombadil can still see him, which is the same way the Witch King would interact with the ring. The user also states that the Council of Elrond are unwilling to leave the ring with Bombadil, though the reasons for this could simply be because he has no interest in it or may lose it. Finally, it's suggested that Tom Bombadil, as the Witch King, places the Barrow-wights in their position, but later removed them to save the hobbits. But we have to ask ourselves, why, if he was the Witch King, would he go through so much trouble just to be a nice normal guy in his downtime? Radagast is more than he seems. Radagast the Brown was nothing more than a few small mentions in the Hobbit book, but when he appeared on the big screen, there were mixed reactions. Some fans were happy to see the wizard, whereas others felt that since he didn't have a big part in the book, shouldn't have really been included. And then you had some who believed the character portrayed in the movie was just utterly ridiculous. Either way, fans have gone on to theorize that the small mentions of Radagast in the novel hint towards a larger role for the character. Even though Radagast is barely mentioned in the book, he is still in the same class as Saruman and Gandalf, but is more known for his ability to transform himself, talk to animals, and even blend in with trees. The theorist continues by stating that Gandalf makes a point of mentioning that Radagast has the ability to use animals as spies, and therefore claims it was Radagast who summoned the eagles to help Gandalf through tough times. It's also pointed out that in the Two Tower, Aragorn and company see a wizard in the nearby Fangorn forest area and is wearing a hat instead of a hood, so couldn't possibly be Saruman or Gandalf, who later denies it was him anyway. Therefore, the hat-wearing wizard was of course Radagast, keeping a close eye on the proceedings. Paranormal Gollum. You all know by now that Gollum wasn't always the way he was. For a time, he was a hobbit by the name of Smeagol, who, after finding the ring, was quickly corrupted by its power. His precious may have rewarded him with an extraordinarily long life, but it also warped him into a scrappy man-goblin, who soon became the bane of Frodo and Sam. Although he has been Gollum much longer than he was Smeagol, it seems at times there is still a war of identities going on within the poor creature, which is no surprise with the centuries he's spent with the ring. One intriguing theory explores how Gollum may actually be a personality trapped inside the ring itself, a possible entity that can possess anyone. The identity wouldn't be unique to Smeagol, therefore, if, say, Aragorn held on to the ring long enough, he would turn into the Gollum-type creature. Bilbo Baggins held the ring for a long period and seemed relatively calm and chilled about it until we saw some cracks forming when Gandalf came to town. It seemed Bilbo wasn't keen on the idea of having his precious taken away from him. We see Bilbo snap at Gandalf in Gollum-like manner, and during a later meeting with Frodo, his face makes a hellish transformation, much to the likeness of Gollum. Even Ilsidur, who chopped off Sauron's finger and took the ring, wrote some creepy journal entries and used the word precious. Surely it can't be a coincidence that a man who lived thousands of years earlier used the same word to describe the ring. It's a very compelling theory that can make you view the story in a totally different light. Witchcraft Smitchcraft. This theory comes from an alleged former witch turned Christian, which really sounds kind of weird. She says that the Lord of the Rings is a giant occult plot to give the whole world over to Satan, and claims that the release of Tolkien's work all of those years ago was a gateway to witchcraft that helped launch the spiritual revolution. That's one big theory on its own, and there's more to follow. The author of this theory continues to make some rather odd claims about Tolkien, and stated that he only wrote during the midnight hours and that he finished his book in 13 years, which is apparently an important number in occult practices. Most likely, this former witch either never practiced witchcraft or never read J.R.R. Tolkien's work. As she states, she performed astrology, palmistry, and numerology, which never even appear in the novels. After somewhat of a bitter verbal attack against Christian organizations that defend supposed occult books like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, she loses it a little, going on to explain that Lord of the Rings promotes witchcraft, as when you become a witch, you're taught that there are good and evil forces and that good will always win. Furthermore, she declares that since Lord of the Rings involves good and evil, with the good always the victor, it must be promoting witchcraft. That is a stretch. Harry Potter and the Fellowship of the Ring? Yes, we know Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings are two totally different stories, universes, timelines, and authors, but who's to say that J.K. Rowling didn't take inspiration from Tolkien for her famed wizard? Well, some awesome person has taken the idea and created a fantastic theory. It all relies on the 5 wizards throughout the Middle-earth: Gandalf the Grey, Saruman the White, Radagast the Brown, and the 2 missing pieces from the Grandpa Pie are the Blue Wizards, who were only ever really glossed over briefly and never followed up on. Both wizards were sent into Mordor to stop the threat of Sauron, and were never seen again, but there's also no mention of their deaths either. Therefore, it's entirely possible the 2 wizards are in fact Albus Dumbledore and his nemesis Gellin Grindelwald. All it would take is some sort of multi-dimensional mishap, and they would be transported to the modern world of Muggles. Of course, there are several other connections, such as phrases like, "It is important to fight and fight again and keep fighting, for only then can evil be kept at bay, though never eradicated," which could mean he wasn't going to give up even after Sauron was beaten. And even though Grindelwald fell to the darkness like Saruman, Dumbledore kept fighting the good fight and was upgraded from Dumbledore the Blue to Dumbledore the White. Even his name, Albus, means white in Latin. It's not impossible, but it's very unlikely to be true. Either way, it's extremely creative, and who's to say these 2 worlds can't exist together? The Brandybuck Killer. Remember near the end of The Return of the King, where Eowyn and Merry are fighting the Witch King of Angmar? Well, we see Merry stab the Witch King and then witness Eowyn's finishing him off. And right before the final blow, the Witch King states that no man can kill him. And that's when it's dramatically revealed that Eowyn is no man, but a woman, thus capable of killing the Witch King. But this being the internet and a world full of theorists, people have argued that maybe it was Merry who delivered the oh-so-important blow. This comes down to the specific claim that no man can kill him. So some people have taken this and said that it should include the race of men as a whole, meaning only the strike of a non-human could cut his ties to Middle-earth. It's also noted that the blade Merry carries was made by the men of Westerness and was made specifically for fighting the Nazgul. Although Merry only struck one of the 2 blows against the Witch King, and it appears very plainly in the text that Eowyn was the one who made the final and most important strike. And when you consider how specific Tolkien was with most of his mythology, you would assume he would have said if he had meant that a non-human was necessary. We hope you enjoyed some of these crazy theories surrounding Middle-earth. Let us know if you have any theories, or maybe you've heard some wild ones that you'd like to share. If so, leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.